China may owe the Philippines $177 billion in South China Sea rent and damages. China owes the Philippines and other countries more than $177 billion in rent and damages for the South China Sea fiasco. The Permanent Court of Arbitration found on Tuesday that Mischief Reef is a low water elevation and within Philippines' exclusive economic zone. This gives the Philippines indisputable legal rights to the reef. But since 1995, when China occupied the reef, China irreparably harmed the reef's delicate marine ecosystem by dredging and building an artificial island there, including a military garrison and airstrip. By my estimate, China owes the Philippines $12.4 billion in rent and damages for Mischief Reef alone. Considering other Chinese island building, the country owes the Philippines and other claimant countries more than $177 billion. If China does and want to pay, the Philippines can sue in the courts of the US and other countries where China holds property. Here is how to calculate what China owes. In 2015, the US paid $1.97 million to the Philippines for 0.58 acres of coral reef destroyed when the USS Guardian went aground. That is a key reference point for environmental claims. Rent is even more costly. In 1988, the Philippines demanded $1.2 billion from the US in rent for 6 military bases, $200 million each per year in 1988 dollars. The US refused and got evicted. By those metrics, the Philippines could sue China for about $4.6 billion of environmental damages to Mischief Reef in 2016 dollars, plus the requirement to pay $7.8 billion in rent. If China refuses to pay the combined $12.4 billion, the Philippines could seek redress in foreign civil courts to attach China offshore assets, of which there are plenty. But China is liable for much more. China occupied 6 additional features in 1988 in the Spratlys claimed by the Philippines, plus Scarborough Shoal in 2012. The Philippines did not resist because they justifiably feared violence on the part of China. In 1988, Vietnam claims that China killed 64 Vietnamese soldiers who resisted on Johnson South Reef in the Spratly. China disputes the claim. Strangely, a propaganda film released by the Chinese Navy in 2009 to celebrate the Navy's 60th anniversary gives more credence to the Vietnamese version. Was shot from one of the Chinese ships and shows the Vietnamese force standing knee-deep in water as the tide rises over the reef. Huge spouts of water then erupt around the Vietnamese troops as the Chinese ships open fire. Within seconds, the thin line of men has completely disappeared and 64 lie dead in the water. The machine guns are Chinese and the victims Vietnamese. The Chinese won the Battle of Johnson Reef with a turkey shoot. China occupied 6 features within Philippines claim in 1988: Hughes Reef, Johnson South Reef, Gavin Reef, Subi Reef, Fiery Cross Reef, and Carteron Reef. China has since dredged and built on all these reefs. Based on Philippines' 1988 demand for rent from the US, each of these 6 features should yield in 2016 dollars about $10.3 billion for 29 years of use, a total of $62 billion. China occupied Scarborough Shoal in 2012, but has not yet built there. There are no known environmental damages to the shoal, but rent for 5 years should be about $1.8 billion inclusive of 2012 and 2016 by my count, and including the $7.8 billion in rent for Mischief Reef. China owes the Philippines about $71.6 billion in rent for occupation of all 8 China-occupied features in the Philippines claimed part of the South China Sea. In addition, the court found that China destroyed a total of 48 square miles in the South China Sea through illegal dredging and artificial island building. Based on the $1.97 million paid by the U.S. to the Philippines in 2015 for the grounding of the USS Guardian, an international court could levy a $105 billion fine on China for ecological destruction of all 48 square miles, payable to the Philippines and other claimant states. Should China refuse to pay, the Philippines and other claimants can bring civil suits in the U.S. and any other locations where China holds substantial assets. The total levy on China for rent on Philippine claim features, plus ecological damage to the entire South China Sea, should be about $176.6 billion, 65% of Philippines' annual GDP, and about 2% of China GDP. That DOES and include rent payable to other claimants, which should also be paid when when China vacates its artificial islands in the South China Sea and pays this fine, plus rent to other claimants and any additional payments to the families of those killed, most attentive citizens will consider justice to have been done. Until then, the international ruling in favor of the Philippines, as China has says, is just a sheet of paper.